Hello everyone, this is a demo of a portrait painted in gouache. This is my palette. This is how I set it up. So I set up all the cool and darks on one side, the whites and the yellows in the middle, and then the reds on the other side. And I'm painting a portrait of my friend Elad. He's a writer. He's a friend from college, and he asked me to do this picture. And I'm working from a photo that he gave me, which in this case I don't have to worry about the copyrights on the image, but I did change around the photo a bit in my drawing just to make it completely unique from the photo. And if you are working from a photo that is a property of a photographer, you do need to be careful and make sure you get permission, or you just completely change it around so that it doesn't look like the photo at all. So anyway, I'm just blocking in some of the underlying skin tones here. You can see I'm using a lot of variations of sienna yellows, cadmium reds, and burnt sienna colors to try to bring some life into his face before I start layering on top of this. I approach gouache painting in the same way that someone might approach oil paintings, and just because that's how I was taught in art school to paint a portrait. And I think a lot of other people use a different method when they use gouache, where it's more sort of flat layers, but I really try to build up the layers so that I can achieve kind of a sculpted look in the face. And unfortunately I didn't get a shot with my palette, so you can't see what colors I'm using, but I can tell that I'm going in right now, and I'm using cadmium red to go around the edges of the nose and in the creases, interior of the eye, around the corners of the mouth, and inside the ear. And the reason I do that, even though it's such a bright red, is because it really brings life to a person's face, and that's really important because underneath your skin there's muscle, bone, blood vessels, circulation. So you really want to try to bring this person to life by emphasizing those things from underneath. So I'm going in also and putting details around the eyes now, and I'm just adding in some darks in his glasses and around his eyes, but I'm not using black. And I think it's really important to emphasize that when I paint a portrait, I almost never use black anywhere on anyone's face, no matter how dark their eyes or their hair or skin tone are. I never ever use black, and that's also something I was taught in art school. So you can see I'm going around and I'm adding kind of some Prussian blue in his hair right now. And I will always use Prussian blue, Viridian green, umbers, deep reds, like crimson colors, and combine them together to come up with a stand-in for black. And the reason why I do that is because it really gives depth when you're trying to make something look like it's going back in space, or like if you're looking inside someone's eyes or their nostril. You want to create depth, and if you use black, it'll really make things look flat. So right now you can see I'm adding some darker sort of greenish tones, greenish purple tones around the bottom of his face, and that's really important when you're painting men, because they have, even if they have a clean face, which in Elad's case he does, they still have kind of a hint of those colors in their face because of the stubble. And if you don't add that in, then they can look quite boyish. So you need to, if you're painting a man, always think about those darker tones on the bottom half of their face. But you don't want to go overboard, because if you go overboard, it'll look like they have a dirty face or that they haven't shaved in a long time. They have it on the underside of their neck as well. So you go in and you add it anywhere from starting from underneath the nose and a little bit going down the neck under the chin. And I added some creases in his neck because his face is turned slightly to the side, but I think it's important to note that although you're not looking at the photo, even if you see lines on someone's face or their neck whenever you're painting, or even if you're painting them from life, you don't want to really add in too many of those lines because it will age someone significantly, and it can be a real distraction from the overall portrait. And I am quite sort of an idealist painter, so I tend to edit those kinds of things. And I think as a painter, you have license to do that. One of my favorite instructors at the Academy of Art, Chuck Pyle, he always said, you know, if something looks weird in a photo or in life, that you see some strange angle or shortening or some lines here and there, if there's too many lines and creases in their shirt or in their neck or whatever, then you just eliminate. You just, if it looks weird, you just don't paint it, you leave it out. So you don't need to paint or draw every single thing that you see. You just want to get the most important aspects that really capture your subject matter, and, you know, bring emphasis to the things you want to draw attention to. So in my case, I like to draw attention to the eyes. You know, they're the doorway to the soul, right? So I'm going in and adding detail to his eyes, which he has brown eyes, but I would never just paint the entire iris brown. I would always go in with some orange and sienna yellow colors within the brown. And, you know, it doesn't really matter whatever eye color you paint. You want to go in with some different kinds of colors in there to capture, you know, the light that may be shining on their face, and also bring some life to their eyes, make them look a little more interesting. It's kind of like what those photo filter apps do when you do like brighten eyes, and it'll add some color and some brightness into the eyes, some flecks of light here and there. So I think as an artist or an illustrator, it's important to do those kinds of things. It's sort of like your job, right? Is to bring life to a two-dimensional painting. And another thing I do, so you can see I'm adding in some more Prussian blue into his hair, and you think like, well, why am I adding blue? And the reason why I do that is because, like I say, I use these deep colors as a stand-in for black, because I want there to be depth, and also because I want there to be a cohesive color palette on the face. So I stick with one particular color at a time, and I go around and I look around at the total image, and I say, where does this tone, this color exist in the face or in the hair and the glasses? And then I go in and I just touch all the areas where the color may exist. And so then that keeps my palette cohesive. So yeah, I like to keep my palette cohesive and harmonious by using every single color that I use across the entire image. And I really try to limit the number of colors that are on my palette in the first place, and that just forces me to have a more harmonious painting. So now I'm going back in again. Like I said before, my process involves just a lot of layering. So I just layer, and it's kind of a process of trial and error. I go in, I touch, I go in, I touch again, and I touch it again until I feel like I've achieved the right look, and I make mistakes and I have to go back over them. Right now I'm just trying to add depth and life into his lips, and adding some pink tones in, and popping out those reds in the corners of the eye and all around the edges of the nose, anywhere where there might be some really strong details. So I'm adding the pink in, and then I have to go back in and blend over it with using just some water, or adding a tiny bit of white just to smooth it out. And I can see that my painting in its current stage is still quite blocky. So at some point I will go in and get a flat brush and some water and maybe just one mid-tone color, and I'll go in and blend it all and try to match the colors, because I have too many bright chunks of color here and there. And so it's gonna look like he has paint splotches on his face if I don't go back in and smooth it all out. Hopefully what I'm saying is interesting. I did do commentary while I was painting this, and I had kids screaming in the background, and I had music playing, which I think maybe ended up being a music copyright infringement, so YouTube did not like that. So now I've decided I'm just going to go back in and redo my commentary after the fact without the music. So I just showed an image of the photo that I'm working with, and I was talking about how I'm looking at the photo in the mid-tone range in the middle of his cheek, in the middle of his forehead, to see what the base skin color tone is, and I'm going to try to match that color so that I can blend out some of these strong shadows and strong colors that I have in there right now. So see, I'm trying to blend and take away some of that blocky look. But I can see, like I say, it's a process of trial and error, and so I make a lot of mistakes and I have to go back over them. So it looks like the color I chose is a bit too light, especially on the shadow area. So you can see now I'm going back in and I'm blending with just some water. And because I went too light with it on the shadow side of his face, I'll have to then go back in with the darks again and try to reestablish the shadow areas. So now what I'm doing is I'm going in and I'm sculpting the forehead, and I really try to take a sculpted approach to painting portraits. So if you're going to do traditional illustrated or fine art portraits that look semi-lifelike, then you really want to understand the structures of the face and really understand the way the light hits the muscles and the bones of the face, and the parts of the face that pop out the most will catch the light. And those are really the only places in the face that should have a bright white. It's really the only place that you should use white in your portrait. You can of course use white to lighten some of your colors, but if you use too much white, then it could end up having kind of a milky, grayish, muddy texture and look about it. So it's important just to pop those lights out only in the very specific areas where the light is going to hit the face. So like on the rim of the glasses, on the very top of the forehead, on the brow ridge, on the bridge of the nose, on the tip of the nose, on the very sort of highlight area. Like if you're thinking about doing makeup, you would do like highlights on the top of the cheek, on the top of the lip, and on the middle of the bottom lip, and occasionally a tiny bit on the chin. So I will have to go back in and blend those white areas just a touch, because if you leave them too, if you do too much, and if you leave them too bright with they cover too much area, they'll end up looking like the face is wet or like the person is really sweaty. So I do have to say that even though you can't see the photo that I'm working from, and even though I am working from a photo I have painted from life extensively, and when I was in art school, it was one of the required classes was anatomy, and I took advanced anatomy. We took trips to the cadaver lab, which was sort of weird and gross, but I can see why it was so important for us to do that, because you really need to understand the muscles, the bones, the structures of the face, hands, of the form of people when you're painting people. I think there's a certain amount of flexibility when you're painting a landscape or a still life. You can get away with a lot more, but when you're painting a face in particular, it's really important for you to understand the structures of the face, even if you're looking at a photo. because there's a lot of muscles around the mouth, and the way the muscles pull in the corner of the lips, the muscles in your jaw, the muscles in your neck, the brow bone, and then the way the muscles above your eyes pull up and down. They pull your eyebrows up and down. It's important to know how those structures all interact with each other and go together. And that really helps even when you're working from a photo and things are not perfectly clear in the photo, you understand how the face is put together. I may go back and edit this video later and make it quite a bit shorter, because initially my video is a little over 2 hours long, which I feel like is a bit too long of a painting demo to sit there and watch, especially since I'm just kind of fudging things, going back and forth and touching here and there. I'm going in now and I'm adding back in the shadows that I sort of erased with all of my blending before. Gouache is a very tricky medium to use. I'm actually not as comfortable or familiar with gouache as I am with oil and acrylic, but I think it's a really handy medium to use because it can be both very opaque and transparent. So it behaves like a watercolor, but you can still get those similar sculpted looks you can get with acrylic or oil. And you can see in the corner of his mouth on the light side of his face there on the left side that I used a dry brush on wet paint, and it actually picked up the paint, so it left a mistake that I'll have to go back in and correct. So now I'm just checking the photo and I'm looking at the reflected light. So when you paint, there's always the highlight side or the light side of the face, the highlights, the midtones, the core shadow, and then the reflected light. So I like to add, one of the traditional methods of adding in reflected light is to put, kind of a purplish blue color, not as bright as the highlights, but still lighter than the shadow side of the face. And that kind of, gives another level of a sculpted feel. It brings a painting to life in a way that makes it look really three-dimensional when you add that reflected light in. That's like the final stage of shading. So you can see I'm going back in with the core shadow here, and then eventually I'll go in with the blue and the purples. And he is wearing a blue shirt, so it'll all tie in together when I finally add that purple edge on the top of his forehead, on the side of his cheek, on his neck, maybe a little bit on his chin and his lip. You don't want to go overboard, but it definitely adds another dimension. So I think I'm going to skip ahead with this video, and so you can see kind of how things are looking when I'm closer to the end. So here we are, and now I've kind of skipped closer to the end. I spent about 3 hours total working on this, and by the end of the recording, I still was not quite finished with the painting. I still have to go back in and fix some of the things that are wrong and add in some details. For instance, I noticed after all of that 3 hours that one of his eyes on the left, it's the left side of his face, but for us it's the right, is too high. So I have to go back and just completely rework the drawing and then fix all of that. But other than that, I feel like it's going pretty well. It's looking like him. He has the bright eyes that I wanted him to have. He has a smirk on his face. He's a really kind person with a nice smile. And I was really trying to capture his personality. As I mentioned earlier in this demo, I was doing commentary as I was painting and filming, and there was music in the background because I was listening to music, and I decided that I would listen to Radiohead to kind of channel Elad's personality, because He was my best friend's roommate in college, and we used to all sit around and listen to Radiohead, and that was his favorite. So, and then I was singing along. I got a bit silly towards the end of the 2-hour video painting, that I started singing, and yeah, I think YouTube's music copyright algorithms did not like that. So at any rate, I was listening to Radiohead while I was painting this towards the end, and I was thinking of Elad and trying to really bring out his personality in his portrait. And I'm working from a photo, but I'm trying to put my own touch on it. I'm trying to bring out the things that I remember about him, and I really like doing portraits of people that I have met in person or that I know very well, because then I feel like I can create my vision of their personality in their face as I paint. And I don't really know what else to say about this portrait, except that I normally spend, so this is about an 11 by 14, which is, a pretty small size. And I'm painting on Bristol board. I started off I did a pencil sketch, and then I went over it with a magenta Prismacolor color pencil before I started painting, and I'm painting in gouache using a kind of a limited palette, and you can see I use very tiny little brushes. I use flats and round small watercolor brushes, and yeah, I usually spend between 4 to 10 hours on any individual portrait, and I'm still never really happy with my portraits, even after I'm completely done and I walk away and I say, okay, that's it, I'm not gonna touch it anymore. And I think that's very normal for artists. We're seeking perfection when we never really achieve it. And like I say, I make a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of people who paint better than I do, but I try my best, and I feel like as if I captured that person and it looks like that person, and I made a painting that people will notice and appreciate, then I did my job. And I feel like I got there with Elad's portrait, and I hope that he'll be happy with it. And I'm not really sure what else to say towards the end of this video, except that I hope that you like it, and if you do, please give it a like, maybe subscribe. I'll try to post more videos. It might end up being a lot shorter than this one because it's a bit tedious to listen to me drawl on for however long this is, 25 minutes to an hour, about my painting process. But yeah, thanks for listening.